In a shocking turn of events, a young, struggling artist would rise to become one of history's most infamous leaders. Adolf Hitler, born in Braunau am Inn, Austria, in 1889, seemed destined for a life of obscurity. However, beneath the surface of his unassuming exterior lay a complex web of emotions and ambitions that would soon propel him to power. Growing up in a troubled home, Hitler's relationship with his father was strained, to say the least. Alois Hitler, a strict and often abusive man, struggled with his own demons, and his behavior would leave a lasting impact on his son. In contrast, Hitler's mother, Clara, was a kind and nurturing presence, providing a sense of stability and comfort in an otherwise chaotic household. Hitler's early life was marked by poverty and instability. The family moved frequently, and Adolf often found himself struggling to make ends meet. This sense of insecurity would later fuel his ambition as he became determined to rise above his circumstances and make a name for himself. As a young man, Hitler became increasingly fascinated with art and architecture. He spent hours sketching and painting, and his talent was evident even at a young age. However, his passion for the arts would eventually give way to a more sinister obsession: politics. Hitler's interest in politics was sparked by the rise of nationalism in Germany, particularly the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche and the concept of the Übermensch, or Superman. These ideas resonated deeply with Hitler, who saw them as a way to transcend his own limitations and become something greater. He began to attend meetings and rallies, where he was drawn into the orbit of the German Workers' Party. At first he was just another face in the crowd, but it wasn't long before he began to make a name for himself as a powerful orator and charismatic figure. His natural talent for public speaking and his ability to connect with the German people would prove to be a potent combination. Hitler's early rise to power was marked by a series of strategic alliances and calculated risks. He formed close ties with the party's leaders, including Anton Drexler and Dietrich Eckart, who recognized his potential and helped him to gain a foothold within the party. As Hitler's influence grew, so did his ambition. He began to use propaganda and manipulation to gain followers and win support. He tapped into the deep-seated fears and insecurities of the German people, using rhetoric that was both inflammatory and seductive. His message of hope and renewal resonated deeply with a nation that had been battered by economic hardship and the aftermath of World War I. Hitler's charisma and ability to connect with the German people were undeniable. He had a way of tapping into their emotions and speaking directly to their hearts. He was a master of the art of persuasion, using his words to weave a spell of enchantment and deception that would hold the nation in thrall for years to come. But how did he manage to control the hearts and minds of an entire nation? The answer lies in his ability to tap into the darkest recesses of human psychology: the fear of the unknown, the need for security and belonging, and the desire for power and status. Hitler's rise to power was a masterclass in manipulation, as he skillfully exploited these deep-seated desires to build a cult of personality that would ultimately consume Germany. As we continue to explore the dark psychology behind Hitler's power, we begin to realize that his rise to power was not just a product of his own ambition, but also a reflection of the deeper flaws and weaknesses of the German people themselves. It is a cautionary tale of how easily the seeds of hatred and intolerance can take root, and how quickly they can spread to consume an entire nation. But what drove Hitler to pursue his twisted vision of a German utopia? What fueled his ambition and drove him to commit atrocities that would leave the world in shock? The answers lie in the complex web of emotions and experiences that shaped his early life, and the choices he made as he rose to power. Join us next as we delve deeper into the mind of the man who would become one of history's most infamous leaders. Note, this script content is approximately 750 words, and the next part of the script will continue to explore the rise of Hitler, his psychology, and the manipulation techniques he used to control the German people. He used words, images, and emotions to create a sense of urgency and purpose among the German people. Adolf Hitler's propaganda machine was a finely tuned instrument designed to whip the nation into a frenzy of patriotism and nationalism. With the help of skilled writers, artists, and filmmakers, he crafted a narrative that would capture the hearts and minds of his audience. From the early days of the Nazi Party, Hitler recognized the power of propaganda in shaping public opinion. He surrounded himself with brilliant minds, men like Joseph Goebbels, who would become his chief propagandist. Together they created a vast network of newspapers, radio stations, and film studios, all dedicated to spreading Hitler's message. At first the propaganda was subtle, focusing on economic and social issues that resonated with the German people. Hitler's speeches, full of promises and platitudes, were carefully crafted to appeal to the masses. But as time went on, the tone became increasingly strident, with Hitler's message growing more and more radical. He used the power of images to convey his message, often employing bold, striking visuals that reinforced his ideas. Posters, films, and photographs all played a role in shaping the national psyche. And at the heart of it all was Hitler himself, a larger-than-life figure, radiating confidence and authority. But at what cost? The truth behind Hitler's propaganda campaign is more sinister than you think. As we delve deeper into the world of Nazi propaganda, we'll discover the dark side of this highly effective strategy. We'll see how Hitler's team used lies, half-truths, and emotional manipulation to shape public opinion and manipulate the masses. One of the most striking aspects of Nazi propaganda was its ability to create a sense of national identity. Hitler's team crafted a narrative that emphasized the superiority of the German people, highlighting their unique cultural heritage and values. This narrative was reinforced by images of proud Germans, proud of their heritage and proud of their leader. But there was a darker side to this narrative. Hitler's team also used propaganda to demonize certain groups, labeling them as enemies of the state. Jews, communists, and other minority groups were singled out for special attention, with Hitler's team portraying them as a threat to German society. The result was a climate of fear and paranoia, with many ordinary Germans becoming embroiled in the Nazis' campaign of hate. As we explore the world of Nazi propaganda, we'll see how Hitler's team used lies and half-truths to shape public opinion. We'll examine the role of fake news, propaganda, and disinformation in spreading Hitler's message. And we'll look at the ways in which Hitler's team manipulated emotions, using fear, anger, and nostalgia to whip the nation into a frenzy. From the early days of the Nazi Party, Hitler recognized the power of propaganda in shaping public opinion. He surrounded himself with brilliant minds, men like Joseph Goebbels, who would become his chief propagandist. Together they created a vast network of newspapers, radio stations, and film studios, all dedicated to spreading Hitler's message. One of the most effective tools in Hitler's propaganda arsenal was the use of rallies and mass events. These events were carefully staged to create a sense of excitement and energy, with Hitler's team using every trick in the book to whip the crowd into a frenzy. The result was a sense of community and belonging, as thousands of ordinary Germans came together to celebrate their leader and their nation. But there was a darker side to these events. Hitler's team used the rallies and mass events to spread hate and intolerance, demonizing certain groups and promoting a climate of fear and paranoia. The result was a nation in chaos, with many ordinary Germans becoming embroiled in the Nazis' campaign of hate. As we continue our exploration of Nazi propaganda, we'll see how Hitler's team used the power of media to shape public opinion. We'll examine the role of radio, film, and print media in spreading Hitler's message, and we'll look at the ways in which Hitler's team manipulated emotions, using fear, anger, and nostalgia to whip the nation into a frenzy. From the early days of the Nazi Party, Hitler recognized the power of propaganda in shaping public opinion. He surrounded himself with brilliant minds, men like Joseph Goebbels, who would become his chief propagandist. Together, they created a vast network of newspapers, radio stations, and film studios, all dedicated to spreading Hitler's message. But at what cost? The truth behind Hitler's propaganda campaign is more sinister than you think. As we delve deeper into the world of Nazi propaganda, we'll discover the dark side of this highly effective strategy. We'll see how Hitler's team used lies, half-truths, and emotional manipulation to shape public opinion and manipulate the masses. The impact of Nazi propaganda was far-reaching, shaping the course of history and leaving a lasting legacy. We'll explore the ways in which Hitler's team used propaganda to justify their policies, including the invasion of Poland and the persecution of minority groups. We'll examine the role of propaganda in shaping public opinion, and we'll look at the ways in which Hitler's team manipulated emotions, using fear, anger, and nostalgia to whip the nation into a frenzy. As we conclude our exploration of Nazi propaganda, we'll see the devastating impact of this highly effective strategy. We'll examine the ways in which Hitler's team used propaganda to shape public opinion, and we'll look at the ways in which they manipulated emotions, using fear, anger, and nostalgia to whip the nation into a frenzy. But there's more to the story. As we continue to explore the world of Nazi propaganda, we'll see the ways in which Hitler's team used propaganda to justify their policies. We'll examine the role of propaganda in shaping public opinion, and we'll look at the ways in which Hitler's team manipulated emotions, using fear, anger, and nostalgia to whip the nation into a frenzy. The power of propaganda is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can be a powerful tool for shaping public opinion and promoting positive change. On the other hand, it can be used to manipulate and deceive, leaving a lasting legacy of hate and intolerance. As we conclude our exploration of Nazi propaganda, we'll see the devastating impact of this highly effective strategy, and we'll examine the ways in which it can be used for good or for ill. He played on their fears, their hopes, and their desires, creating a cult of personality that would change the course of history. Adolf Hitler's rise to power was as fascinating as it was terrifying, and at the heart of his success lay a masterful understanding of human psychology. Hitler's manipulation tactics were not limited to grand speeches or public appearances. He knew that the key to controlling 80 million people lay in their individual minds, and he set out to create a sense of dependence and loyalty among his followers. He did this by exploiting the deep-seated fears of the German people, particularly the fear of economic instability and the threat of communism. By creating a sense of urgency and purpose, Hitler was able to mobilize the German people behind his vision for a Third Reich. He promised to restore German greatness, to create jobs, and to provide a sense of security and stability that the Weimar Republic had failed to deliver. His message resonated deeply with the German people, who were desperate for a leader who could deliver on his promises. But Hitler's tactics went far beyond simply appealing to people's emotions. He also knew how to use the power of suggestion to shape their thoughts and behaviors. He would often use repetition, emphasizing key phrases or ideas until they became ingrained in the minds of his followers. He would also use visualization techniques, asking his followers to imagine a future where Germany was strong and prosperous again. One of the most effective tools in Hitler's arsenal was the creation of a sense of shared experience among his followers. He would often use public events such as rallies and parades to create a sense of community and belonging among his followers. These events were carefully choreographed to create a sense of excitement and anticipation, and they provided a sense of connection and shared purpose among the German people. But how far would he go to maintain his grip on power? As Hitler's control over Germany grew, so did his paranoia and megalomania. He began to see himself as a visionary, a hero who was destined to lead Germany to greatness. He became increasingly tyrannical, crushing any opposition and silencing anyone who dared to question his authority. Hitler's manipulation tactics also extended to the use of propaganda and censorship. He knew that the key to controlling the narrative was to control the information that people received. He would often use propaganda posters, films, and newspapers to shape public opinion and create a sense of fear and paranoia among his followers. He would also use censorship to silence any dissenting voices, crushing any opposition to his regime. The devastating consequences of Hitler's manipulation were far-reaching and devastating. He destroyed critical thinking and individuality, creating a culture of conformity and obedience. He also destroyed the very fabric of German society, creating a culture of fear and paranoia that would last for generations. As we look back on the history of the Third Reich, it's clear that Hitler's manipulation tactics were a key factor in his rise to power. He was a master of psychology, using his knowledge of human nature to create a cult of personality that would change the course of history. But his tactics also had a profound impact on the German people, creating a culture of fear and conformity that would have far-reaching consequences for generations to come. The question remains, how would we recognize the signs of manipulation if we were living in a similar situation? How would we protect ourselves from the tactics of a charismatic leader who seeks to control our minds and shape our actions? These are questions that we must consider as we reflect on the lessons of history and the dangers of manipulation. He understood the darkest corners of human psychology and used them to his advantage. Hitler's grasp of human nature was so profound that it allowed him to tap into the deepest fears, desires, and anxieties of the German people. Through a masterful application of psychological manipulation, he was able to control the thoughts, feelings, and actions of millions. One of the key tactics Hitler employed was the use of fear. By exploiting the collective anxieties of the German people, he created a sense of urgency that demanded action. He fueled this fear with inflammatory rhetoric, exaggerating the threats posed by the Nazi Party's enemies, Jews, communists, and other perceived adversaries. As the propaganda machine churned out image after image of otherness, Hitler skillfully exploited the deep-seated fears of the German people, transforming them into a potent force for conformity and control. But Hitler didn't stop there. He also leveraged anger and hatred as tools of manipulation and control. By tapping into the deep-seated frustrations and resentments of the German people, he was able to create a sense of shared purpose that transcended individual interests. The us versus them mentality that emerged during this period was a potent force, driving the Nazi Party's aggressive expansion and the devastating consequences that followed. The devastating consequences of Hitler's use of psychological manipulation are etched into the very fabric of history. Entire communities were destroyed, their populations decimated by the relentless tide of hatred and violence. The systematic persecution of Jews, Romani people, and other minority groups left deep scars that still linger today. And yet, even as we recount the atrocities committed under Hitler's rule, we must confront the darker aspects of our own nature. But what drove Hitler to use such ruthless tactics, and what does it reveal about human nature? Was it a product of his own twisted psyche? Or did he tap into a deep-seated reservoir of violence and aggression that lies within us all? These questions have haunted historians and psychologists for generations, and the answers remain as elusive as ever. As we consider the darkest corners of human psychology, we're forced to confront a disturbing truth, that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, we can still be swayed by the most base and primal of human emotions. Hitler's rise to power serves as a stark reminder that our own capacity for self-deception and manipulation is far greater than we might care to admit. And it's this realization that should give us pause as we consider the lessons of history and the dark psychology that lies at the heart of human nature. The legacy of control. The lessons of Hitler's control are more relevant today than ever before. As we continue to navigate the complexities of modern society, it's essential to understand the lasting impact of his methods on German society and culture. The aftermath of World War II saw a Germany in ruins, its people struggling to come to terms with the atrocities committed in their name. But beneath the surface, a more insidious legacy persisted. A culture of fear, suspicion, and blind obedience. Decades after the war, the echoes of Hitler's control still resonated through German society. The once thriving Jewish community was all but exterminated, leaving behind a void that would take generations to fill. The survivors of the Holocaust were often shunned, their experiences dismissed as un-German or un-Aryan. The very notion of dissent was discouraged, as if any form of criticism threatened to undermine the fragile social order. As the years passed, a new Germany began to emerge, one that proudly reclaimed its place on the world stage. But the legacy of Hitler's control continued to shape the country's psyche. The rise of neo-Nazi groups, the proliferation of hate speech, and the increasing polarization of German politics all served as stark reminders of the dangers of unchecked power. So what can we learn from Hitler's rise to power? How can we prevent similar cases of manipulation and control? The answer lies in cultivating critical thinking, media literacy, and emotional intelligence. By recognizing the warning signs of propaganda, disinformation, and emotional manipulation, we can begin to build a more resilient society, one that resists the allure of authoritarianism and instead celebrates the values of diversity, inclusivity, and free expression. The importance of these lessons cannot be overstated. In today's world, where social media platforms amplify and distort information with alarming speed, the dangers of manipulation and control are more pressing than ever. As we navigate this treacherous landscape, it's essential to remember the lessons of Hitler's control, to recognize the power of language, the potency of propaganda, and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. What can we do to prevent similar cases of manipulation and control? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Consider the ways in which you can promote critical thinking, media literacy, and emotional intelligence in your own community. The future of our world depends on it. As Hitler's grip on Germany tightened, the once thriving nation became a shadow of its former self. The streets were filled with the sound of marching boots, the air thick with the stench of fear. People lived in constant dread of the Gestapo, their every move monitored, their every word scrutinized. The Nazi regime had created a culture of fear, one that would be nearly impossible to shake. One of the most effective tools in Hitler's arsenal was propaganda. He understood that the key to control lies not in brute force, but in shaping public opinion. Through a network of newspapers, radio stations, and film studios, Hitler was able to disseminate his message to the masses. He crafted a narrative of a Germany under siege, a people beset on all sides by enemies, and he made himself the hero, the savior, who would lead them to victory. The propaganda machine was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Hitler's speeches were designed to appeal to the deepest fears and desires of the German people. He spoke of a glorious past, of a nation that had been wronged and was now fighting back. He painted vivid pictures of enemies, of Jews, communists, and other perceived threats to German society. And he promised a better future, one in which Germany would be restored to its former glory. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. Hitler's inner circle was a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing. His closest advisors were often at odds with one another, each vying for power and influence. And Hitler himself was a master manipulator, using his charisma and intelligence to play one against the other. It was a game of cat and mouse, with the German people as the pawns. As the war raged on, the Nazi regime became increasingly paranoid. Suspicion and distrust spread throughout the party, with even the most loyal followers beginning to doubt one another. It was a house of cards, one that was on the verge of collapse. And yet Hitler remained in control, his grip on the nation tightening with each passing day. But for how much longer?